So what we just had there is former President Rawlings, the founder of the NDC. There's so much to chew on. I mean, this is too much. I mean, almost to analyze. So much he said there that you have to spend days trying to understand from an analytical point of view what he meant. Some of them are pretty plain. Some of them are pretty obvious on the surface. Some of them you need to read between the lines to see what he's saying and who he's talking about. But that is why we're here to do that for you. That is a last major news event of the year, and we are right on top of all that for you here on this special edition of Newsfile, the Year in Review edition. I'm still expecting my guests to join me very shortly, but I have Malik Dabu, a colleague of the political desk, with me already in the studio. We're expecting Paul Adomotri to be here very shortly. Ifya Pukwa also to be here, and Kaba also to be here very shortly as we begin our analysis of some of the key things that we've just heard. And we'll be tying all that we just heard, because all that we just heard from the former president ties in to some of the key news events of this year. He's talked about the corruption that went on in his own government and the NDC. That, if you look at our list that we're going to look at, was top on the list as well. We have many corruption issues to deal with, and he's talked about that. He talked about the neglect of the masses, the show of wealth, the class show of display of wealth by some people in government, and some of the deep things he said. He says we're feeling smart and comfortable because we thought the division in the MPP will deliver us victory. How could we not realize that that division was not going to percolate to the grassroots? And that is a powerful line indeed. Rawlings hasn't lost his political acumen. He's way up there. If you followed us on your lecture headquarters, myself and Malik constantly were saying this was a fight with the NPP at a national level. And at a grassroots level, it wasn't having a real impact there. But people thought, well, according to Rawlings, his party simply thought that because there was a fight at the top within the MPP, they were going to win. And probably that explains, he says, why the party became complacent. We're going to analyze that very shortly. And there's some powerful things he said also. And I'm going to say this and then give you a certain context. He said, we didn't lose elections on December 7th. We lost it way before December. When he's talking about we, of course, he's talking about the NDC, that they lost elections way before December 7th. And he goes on to say that I kept warning them privately and in public, but the uncouth and disrespectful people in government kept on attacking some of us. And he goes on to say that the 2008, and this, I guess, is a controversial one. He said the 2008 elections was delivered to them, the NDC, on a silver platter by some of them, by himself and others. And that right after that, he says, evil-natured people started taking advantage and taking over the party. And that he found it sad that the executives in the party did not have the intelligence to spot these evil-natured people and root them out. And for him, that's why they lost. Now, I'm going to give you a certain context, because remember, I did an interview with the General Secretary of the NDC, Joseph Nketia, and I asked him a question. Is former President Rawlings going to be part of the campaigning this year? His answer to me was, if he was your father and he's that old, will you allow him to be on a campaign trail? And that former President Rawlings was too old and frail to be bothered with campaign, etc., etc. But clearly, from what we just heard from former President Rawlings, he had been doing work in the background, advising them, and he had been shut up. Essentially, he was gagged essentially by people he calls evil-natured people, who he says kept on attacking his person. Now he talks about some handlers who have profited from the corruption of the last two terms. He's talking about the NDC administration 2009 to 2012, and 2012 then under John Dramani Mahama to now, who profited under the corruption of the last two terms, will like to tell a lie to perpetuate their hold on the party. And that some of them are now blaming him for the defeat. Then he says, the people have now seen through it. And because they've seen through it, he says, we will, and this is the part that for me struck me, a sense that now the people have seen through it and they can't blame him anymore. They, himself included, will take hold of the party and bring back the party to that moral high ground that he says they've abandoned, for which reason they lost. And that brings back to a point we'll analyze very shortly. Some have said already that now with the defeat, the Rawlings factor is going to grow stronger. He would like to take a hold of his party and, I guess, whip them back in line. And maybe that last line, and he reserved that for the last, was indicating to us that that is exactly what he wants to do. He wants now the leader, the founder of the party, is going to take over the party, he probably suggesting there. And we'll be analyzing that. You know, of course, I mean, people who understand this better than I do will join me very shortly to try and read in between the lines to see what he meant with those lines that he put out there. And note the people who surrounded him today. Goosie Tanoh. Alhaji Hudu Yahya was seated right beside him. We had, of course, the former Attorney General, Martin A.B.K. Abdu, somebody who had been saying some of these things that Rawlings just said for years, since he was booted out as Attorney General. And Rawlings made the point today that they didn't listen to those voices, and that is why they've lost. Well, let's return to the studio now. Let's start our year in review. Paul Adomotri just joined me. Of course, he's a political guru in his own right. I remember that fantastic documentary that he put out a few weeks before the elections that got a lot of attention, tracing our political history over the years. He understands the Rawlings factor better than most of us in the media. And I'm delighted to say that he joins us in the studio. Ifya Pokwa has joined us very shortly also as we begin to analyze this. Malik is already here with us. So you want to stay with us. You don't want to miss this. We've been served. This is what I was hoping for, and we got it. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
I mean, when you were driving and you heard that Rawlings was going to speak, how did you feel?
I was excited, but I think that word had been going around that there will be such a major speech from him. It's not unexpected that he was going to discuss the election and the way the NDC lost. It's true that he had made statements publicly and privately signaling that the NDC was going to lose the election. But for me, what I take from this event is what I call the relaunch of Goosie Tanoh's presidential ambition. That's really what happened. And Goosie Tanoh had been primed for the presidency within the workings of the CADA movement in the PNDC and NDC for a long time. The Professor Mills interaction and interference is what got Goosie off the track of inheriting the Rawlings whole political platform. And out of the Professor Mills interaction, President Mahama also emerged. And so Goosie had always been on the sidelines. In fact, returning to the NDC in 2008 to help Professor Mills win, but he's really been on the sidelines. And I get the sense that he had been looking for the opportunity because he all the time had carried this narrative of probity, accountability, and had become the hero of the cadres who actually built PNDC and the NDC, the so-called time-tested values that they have been talking about. So what I take out now really is that this certainly is a relaunch of Goosie Tanoh's political and presidential ambition to be president, because
and it clearly appears that he has endorsement of the founder.
It looks like,
and when he suggests at the tail end that we want to take back the party and get it back onto the moral high ground, possibly Goosie Tanoh, he believes, is the person.
And so it's going to give us a lot to write and talk about and online about in the next few years, because if you have an Akufo-Addo presidency with Dr. Bawumia and Goosie and President Mahama, or somebody prepared by President Mahama, looking for the opposition leadership, that will be a lot of effort and a lot of stuff to cover. I get the sense that the Rawlings people, whereas they hold the moral high ground, may be underestimating the capacity of President Mahama to hold his own in that battle, and it's going to be very interesting. I think they are wishing President Mahama away, and so they start all of these about how the elections was lost. Yes, Mr. Mahama is down now, but he is a savvy politician. Even if he doesn't place himself in, he will know how to manage. And that's going to be, those orchestrations is going to be very interesting for us to observe, whilst President Akufo-Addo and Vice President Bawumia continue to lead the nation and what will be happening in the opposition party. The sad part is that I think it is also going to signal a reduction of effect of the smaller parties. I think by the time we get to the next election, the smaller parties would have overstayed their welcome. The honeymoon will be over. There will be no speculation that something significant will happen about Indum also if people like Goosie are coming back onto the political platform. So really, that's my big take from this event. Goosie Tanoh has relaunched his presidential ambition on JJ's platform.
Yeah, and Paul is going to stay. He's going to stay with us, of course, for the next few hours. And we're going to draw a lot on that documentary you did because Rawlings was tracing back the history. In fact, all that he did today was saying that the reasons why we did 31st December revolution, we lost our way. We abandoned those moral probability, accountability, you know, eschewing corruption. We lost our way, and that is how come we've lost. And you touched on a little bit of that during the. We'll talk about all of that. Malik, we were here when we said when Goosie Tanoh spoke. I started feeling maybe the man himself won't speak, and, you know, because he's been deliberately avoiding speaking publicly on NDC. In fact, the last time he spoke, long ago, when they, I think, launched, was it their manifesto? I think it was. Yeah. When he said, when he said at that platform that he's not going to speak, he's going to wait until after the election.
He said people were expecting him to boom.
Yeah, but he's not going to, and that his wife or the wife of the president had told him, you know,
she was trying to,
you know, and that he's going to wait until after the elections. And so we're waiting for after the elections. This was a perfect opportunity for him, but we were not sure whether he's going to use this opportunity to do that. So when he started speaking, going through your mind, how are you feeling?
Evans, you know that we always said that if the NDC lost the elections, there was going to be a nasty fight for the soul of the party. I think that the stage is set, the battle has begun, and Paul was right. The appearance of Goosie Tanoh at this event, and for many, many years, I haven't seen him at this event, you know, because of the MPP's opposition to this event and the fights within the party.
Hold your horses for me, because I'm told that we have an interview with Goosie Tanoh himself right now. Let's listen to it.
Along the way, and the people decided that they wanted an alternative, which presented something more credible than they had been used to in the last few years. But it's normal in the nature of politics. What we have to do is to regroup, reassess the situation, and basically go back to being faithful to what we stand for, and has been the reason for many Ghanaians to vote NDC and other progressive forces to power over the last few years.
All right, recently we heard that a 13-member committee had been set up to look into events that led to the circumstances that led to the defeat. How sure are we that the findings of this committee will inform the activities of the party going forward? So in the 2020 elections, we'll see a change.
Well, ultimately, it's not up to committees or structures at the top. It's very much up to the grassroots and their mobilization to achieve a party that they believe reflects their interests. So yes, it's important for leadership to take initiative, but ultimately whether that initiative is valid, is relevant, is a function of what the grassroots say. And it's always going to be the case.
Do you think the incoming administration has the capacity to deal with the issues that are confronting the country at the moment?
Well, they made a lot of promises, and of course all of us want progress, and we wish the new president well. But those promises, we'll have to see whether they can live up to them. Because it is very different when you're in power and very different when you're outside power. And you're confronted with the daily challenges of running an economy such as ours, where basically you do not really control very much because your prices, the commodity prices are controlled from outside, externally, and indeed the vicissitudes of those prices themselves impact very negatively, more often than not, on your ability to mobilize resources to achieve the policies and projects and programs that we promised at election time. But we wish them good luck, and we do hope that within the time span that NDC has and other progressive forces, we can begin to renew ourselves and rededicate ourselves to the values that we stand for and the progress of Ghana, Mother Ghana. Ghana first.
Right there.
Just watch the Goosie Tanoh. The man tipped, of course, by Paul Adomochi to be one of those who's going to slug it out in the next 4 years or so to regain the leadership of the party. I'm talking about the presidential level. Speak to us exclusively at that event. And there's something he kept on saying, the grassroots, the grassroots, the grassroots. And Rawlings made that point too, that there was a disconnection between the leadership and the grassroots. And that is why they lost elections. But again, that is interesting because if you listen to the reasons, really, the reasons that were not offered publicly, but privately, and the real reason behind the Munche 3 release was that the grassroots were disenchanted. And if you didn't release the Munche 3, you know, there's going to be an explosion. They didn't release the Munche 3, but that didn't solve the problem with the grassroots. And so it brings back the question that Paul and others have raised, that he keeps on talking about grassroots. Is it that Goosie Tanoh and the Rawlings and his aides and people who are aligned to him believe that they have that connection to the grassroots, and the others do not, and that is what's going to play to the advantage in regaining and taking control of this party? I don't know, but we'll analyze it. You were talking about,
yes,
regaining the soul, a struggle to regain the soul of the party.
Absolutely, and what we've just seen is the beginning for me of the fight. And remember that for a long time, the Rawlingses appeared, given their posturing, to be in the corner of Ekos Piogabra, trade minister currently. It's interesting to see how things will pan out now that Goosie Tanoh is in. Because
some may say Piogabra is tainted because he himself was part of this mess, so to speak, just borrowing the words of former President Rawlings. He was part of this mess, so maybe he's tainted. We need somebody who is a total breakaway from this whole mess that had just lost elections to bring us, the party, back to moral high ground. That's what Rawlings will argue.
Note that there are those who believe that the coming in of Piogabra itself was a way to appease the Rawlingses, because he had been sitting outside, and remember those words, person in. He was sitting out, person in. He was
Team
the one
A,
who
Team
coined
B,
the term Team B ministers, and that Team A were on the sidelines and Team B ministers were engaged under Professor Mills's presidency, and that things were not going well simply on account of the fact that the government had chosen to use Team B ministers when their Team A people were on the sidelines. So I think that Piogabra is still very much interested in the presidency. I think that he's kept his relationship with the Rawlingses going in the hope that if he throws in his heart into the challenge, they will back him. It's quite curious that Goosie Tanoh, who saw himself as a natural successor to Rawlings in the 2000 elections, has jumped in, because at that time he actually broke away from the NDC to form the Reform Party because he believed that he had been bypassed, because it was his turn. He had done all the work, he had related with the cadres, he had played his role, he had imbibed the principles of probity and accountability as espoused by the Rawlings at the time. He believed that it was his time for him to lead the party at the time. But as Paul put it, Mills interrupted that process. He got peeved, he broke away, formed his own party. It didn't go too well with him. He sat on the sidelines for a while. 2000, he joined the campaigns. The party came into power. I'm aware he is, I think, a board member or something at GMPC. It's interesting that he appeared today, and listen to his speech. He spoke extremely well.
And the reason why I sort of agree with Paul, because again, what we're going to do a lot today is reading between the lines. We had people like Matanamidu there. We had people like Huru Yaya there. Senior cadres.
Yes.
Far senior than Goosie Tanoh. But the person who was chosen to speak, to herald the big man himself, was Goosie Tanoh.
And listen to what he said.
And note that when Rawlings was about to speak, and those who probably missed it but watched on TV saw, Rawlings was going around trying to ask who else wants to speak. He mentions Goosie, he mentions Matanamidu. Do you want to talk? Matanamidu says, no, I don't want to have anything to say. He was even going to the chiefs, the ordinary people. Nobody wanted to speak because Goosie Tanoh has spoken. Then he says, if I knew Goosie Tanoh was going to speak before me, I would have kept quiet.
Yes.
That tells you a lot.
And it tells you how much regard he's holding the guy in.
Absolutely.
And he's showing the guy reverence and
this was by design, not by accident.
I also think that Rawlings is making an apology to Goosie, and I'll explain. The interference of Goosie's political career was the Swedru Declaration, which was a Rawlings platform.
Yeah.
And where Professor Mills was introduced that he's the heir apparent.
Yeah.
And the pressure was put on Rawlings by a certain group of people, we'll talk about them, to make that announcement because the party was getting confused.
And people forget that you were a reporter. I remember you.
I'm still a reporter. I'm still a reporter.
You covered that, right?
Yeah.
You were there at the Swedru.
No, I wasn't in Swedru. I was here.
Okay.
But we had people there.
Yeah.
But I'm still a reporter, by the way. That's my passion. I like to do that. So people put pressure on Rawlings and said, look, this confusion about who is going to inherit you, say it today, that is your vice president, so that you can set the tone straight. As soon as the declaration came, Goosie took up an offer on Joy FM's front page program and came into the studio and talked about how wrong the Soweto Declaration was. And that was the first time we had dissenting voices from the PNDC and DC. And it was such a big event that Goosie will appear on radio and talk against something Rawlings has done. So that was a Soweto Declaration. Now, this declaration was orchestrated by what became known as the Fanti Confederacy, a people that Rawlings had fallen out completely with right now. Kofi Totobi, Kwache, Kwame Nahoy, Ato Ahoy, Pakwesi Emisata, and all of those. Emisata got reconciled a little bit recently over some VRA matter, but basically, that Fanti Confederacy group who were behind Professor Mills were those who occasioned this announcement in Soweto 2 years before election 2000 that Rawlings should say that Vice President Mills was going to be. Rawlings comes back several years later, again on the platform, and now offers the platform to Goosie. So I think really he's rendering an apology to Goosie for interrupting his political career that had been so well prepared from the 1980s. Goosie at a very young age was sent to be representative of the U.S. Security Council. He was taken to all sorts of places.
So he was groomed.
In real grooming and preparation in the socialist way, like Fidel Castro, Raul Castro. That's the kind of thing they did for him. In those days, the Cold War was still in place. So this kind of grooming was a typical archetype of the Cold War system, where there's a leader, the Korean system, a leader rules for 30 years and somebody is groomed after him. They even said Goosie's skin color pigmentation was very close to that of Rawlings and all of that. So I think another takeaway from this event is that JJ appears to be rendering an apology to Goosie that I interrupted your political career. Here it is again. Come and let's go.
And
Malik, I'll come to
yes, to buttress that point that Paul just made, and it's a fantastic point. If you remember all the challenges that Rawlings had with the Mills government, it would tell you why this is important. It's important for him to render this kind of public apology, be it with all the subtlety that came with it, to Goosie Tanoh, that the man he chose at the Soweto Declaration didn't quite live up to expectations because he had difficulties. He actually called Mills names on platforms. He was unhappy, and he made his unhappiness public about Mills's presidency and the manner in which Mills governed, because at that time, Rawlings believed that the NDC grassroots was yearning for vengeance, that the sins of the Kufuor government ought to be visited on the government after they had lost elections. Mills was unprepared to do that. He didn't think that it was right to do those things that Mr. Rawlings was urging him on to do. Now, Mr. Rawlings, having been disappointed and having bypassed Goosie Tanoh to pick somebody who disappointed him, and to some extent the party he believes, it's important for him to render this kind of public apology.
If you're let's give me your own take. These are initial comments. We're going to dissect line by line what he said because it's important, and then we're going to relate that to the big stories of the year, because a lot of what he said today was, and Rawlings doesn't do anything. It appears it done it by chance, but trust me, it's planned. When he was going around pretending as he wanted for somebody to speak, it's planned.
He knew nobody would speak.
Of course, he knew nobody would speak. And then he comes and pretends to say, oh, if I knew Goosie was coming to speak, he knew Goosie was going to speak.
And
of course
he knew what Goosie was going to say.
Goosie was going to say, but he had to pretend, don't take Rawlings literally. There's always something beneath what he said. But if what's your take on?
I don't want to be too, specific and emphatic that Goosie is the chosen man. I still want to do a wait and see kind of thing, and wait and see who else is going to be interested in the presidency, because I think that if a party is in power, sometimes there's a little bit of control as to the divisions, the dissenting opinions, and the other interested parties in the system. So once you're in opposition and once NDC has lost power, that's when you get to see the other people who probably are interested in the presidency. So I'm of the opinion that let's wait and see, because Goosie is not the only dedicated cadre who was interested in the presidential bid in NDC. I'm sure that there are other people. Now I've hinted, I've heard other people who have expressed interest in the presidency. I want to see those people. I don't think that somebody like Spio Grabra is going to do a good bid for NDC. I think that being part of President Mahama's government and having soiled himself, even if you look at his own performance as trade minister, I don't think that he's delivered the best. And therefore, Malik spoke about his, relationship with the Rawlings. I doubt if the relationship with the Rawlings
is that strong
now. Because when Rawlings speaks about probity, accountability, and integrity, I do not think that Spielgabra can.
Wasn't Spielgabra the one who superintended that letter that leaked, asking people to bring money so that they pay off what the port?
Yes.
The West Blue case
scandal.
Yeah.
It was
and
such
these
a bad
are things that Rawlings are doing.
Inspection company.
Yeah, it was such a bad episode.
But there was a mess that he was trying to clean up. If you ask him, he would tell you
that, by the way, was this year, right? That was this
up.
year. Well, that story was this year.
It's this year.
So, of course, you're doing a year in review, so let's talk about it.
But I think just for us to say something about Spielgabra in terms of having, as it's put, joined the Mahama
corruption
train that has gone down, I think Spio will still emerge differently. I mean, if there are 2 or 3 politicians in this country that you can call incorruptible, after Nana Akufo-Addo of the MPP, politicians who have had a big public life, long public life, that you can't really find corruption against them. You take Nana Akufo-Addo, Spielgabra will be the next.
I think it's not.
I think Spio will be able to hold.
But what about the West Blue? It's not the West Blue.
That wasn't corruption.
What was it?
He was trying to correct an error.
But the letter he wrote,
yes,
asking
the point I was making is that these
people should bring money
these destinations finish. We're going to benefit from a new process. That new process had taken place before he arrived. It was not altogether a particularly legitimate process, but it had been done by law. So you're saying to them that those of you who will benefit from this, there's a debt that we have to pay to the guy who was the victim of this new process, who is suing us. So bring the money, let's pay the guy who is suing us. Then we can have all of you participate in this new process.
Was that lawful?
Because you will benefit.
But it was an ingenious attempt to solve a problem that would have occasioned judgment debt, significant judgment debt against the taxpayer.
So he will actually come out.
I'm saying that
let the fear wrap up.
To assess a person's performance, it's not just based on whether the person is corrupt or not. There's also the major issue for me of competence.
Yeah,
and
but
I think
Spio
is one of those that you will say is competent as well.
Way up there.
Well, that's what you say, but I don't see that. If in terms of impact, competence and impact, for me, if you compare somebody like Alan Chemanting to Spielgabra, and in terms of the impact of his
you think?
I think that it doesn't come close. I'm limiting that to trade. I'm limiting that to trade. I'm limiting.
Then education, communication.
So you're only assessing his ministerial tenure as a trade minister.
I'm just. You see,
that's what you're doing. Okay.
You see, you are losing.
That's 2 years.
But you see, you are losing sight of the fact that the young new voters, who's got to know what Spielgabra has done, all the things that you're speaking about, but they don't know. And that's one of Rawlings' problems. You see, all this cadre talk and all
that's an important point.
And issues that you
how many people still remember
do not,
that?
Kind of sync with the new voters. And they are growing. They are growing. They're young people who have voted.
That's a huge factor in this year's election.
It's a huge factor. And those young people do not understand this probity, accountability, this cadre thing. So true. If they need to get to the grassroots, you need to actually educate them. Let people know what you're talking about when you talk about caderism and all that revolution and all that.
It just means anti-corruption.
No. You see, but they don't understand. The young voters have.
But the young voters voted on corruption in this election.
But
that's true.
They voted on corruption based on
allegations of corruption.
Listen, they did that based on what they see in Mahama's government because that's current, it's fresh.
You're right
but if Rawlings speaks about what we did then in 79, in 81, and
can they relate
Goosie Tanoh,
to that?
And they don't know.
But I know how we were all raised idolizing Rawlings.
You see, young.
I mean, weren't we all raised idolizing him?
Yeah, but those young people are idolizing President Rawlings. Probably are idolizing him because of the criticisms he makes of his own party. What I'm worried about is once NDC wants to return, it appears that Rawlings wants to take NDC back to those days.
Yeah, that's what he wants to do.
You see, but the young people need to appreciate what those days mean, what those days stand for. What were the issues? What were the highs and the lows? So that they can buy into that. And then they can appreciate somebody like Goosie. Else, you can market Goosie, but only the older people will buy Goosie. You can market Spielgabra. Only the older people can appreciate that history he's got. Yeah. You see, they can't relate to him in terms of and look at NDC. It's expanded its electoral college. Yeah. You have new people who are voting in NDC who didn't used to vote in NDC. You need to be able to present the party to those people to appreciate them. But you can't do that without looking at why NDC lost.
But he's given us the prognosis today.
I know he's given us. Many people don't agree with him in NDC. I see a lot of the things that he said today as almost like an insinuation. And I
no, but some of them were very specific and emphatic.
But you see, very emphatic. But you see, I think that if a lot of the people who are in President Mohammed's government will not even agree with what he's saying. Although it's true when he speaks about uncultured, uncouth, very strong, disrespectful. And these are the things like Rawlings said. NDC knew they were losing. When I saw that NDC was desperate, when they did the media buying across the blitz, then I saw that was an action in complete desperation. This is a party that had told us by President Mahama in his State of the Nation address that we are having economic difficulties. So how do you come about with the money to buy all the media?
I mean, since we already started reviewing the elections and everything, let's stay with that theme then, because Rawlings led us to that. Malik, you have something to say before?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I get her point, and I share the view that Goosie Tanoh may have a difficult task because at this point, not too many people, I don't believe too many people remember Goosie Tanoh in our politics. For those of us who are media people and who are interested in the coverage of the politics story, we will know him.
In fact, I was surprised when he plays a prominent role at this event. I was asking you.
I saw him. I saw him and I told you that Goosie Tanoh sitting at the back.
We're asking whether he's the guy.
Yes.
I mean,
you know, so if you take Goosie Tanoh to my village, I wonder how many people will remember him. So he does not have a public presence. He doesn't have a public face.
But Paul made a very important point. The next 4 years is going to be a big deal for him. Great. What he does between now and that's why I said this is a launch of his bid. What he does and he granted an interview. I'm pretty sure this is part of the whole, and he chose the media network to do that first, because he knows we are live. You know, people. I'm pretty sure there's a lot happening in the background that we don't know yet. You know, and I'm pretty sure the next 4 years.
I'm sure there's a lot happening.
Paul knows very well the marketing is you know, once you sell something, once you advertise a product, once you put a product up, it's one or two. If you are very strategic, and this is political communication, it's not guaranteed that what he does in the next 4 years.
But he has 4 years to market himself.
Well,
so I was making the point that I agree with her to a limited extent about the difficulties that Goosie Tanoh may have. On the case of Spiogabra, I completely disagree with her. My disagreement is founded on this. Spiogabra, if we say that there are problems with the Mahama government that affected the NDC's chances in this election, I do not think that you can tar Spiogabra with those problems. Because remember that he was brought into government barely 2 years ago, right?
But this is somebody who had called everybody Team B, with the exception of himself.
Yes,
so everybody was expecting him to do magic.
I'm saying
for want of a better expression.
Do you remember what Hannah Tete did as trade minister?
Not exactly.
Haruna Dusu, do you remember what he did as trade minister? So you can't, if the government founded on certain areas, you can't blame that on Spiogabra, the trade minister. He was there for 2 years. I think he played his part. I think he carried himself with respect and with honor and with dignity.
Respect, yes.
Yes. So if there are problems, difficulties, and challenges with the government, you can't tar him with those ones.
Okay, let me